Okay, this is me, Brendan, on my channel. This my dad and sister and her baby. This in the description it will say science fantasy. This is like just what I think why there should be more science fantasy stuff. First, I'm going to explain what science fantasy is. Science fantasy is the mixture of sci-fi and fantasy together, and most people don't know what that is because it's very rare. And a good example of science fantasy is, well, one thing that I didn't know was science fantasy until I got into science fantasy was Star Wars. Because Star Wars is actually science fantasy. Because think about it, the lightsabers are like swords, and the Force is kind of like magic. And some of you probably be like, you know, Star Wars stuff. I'm not science fantasy, but it's real science fantasy because I looked it up and it says it's science fantasy. And there's also you can look it up and it'll say it's science fiction. But the reason why I think there should be more science fantasy stuff is because, well, one thing, you can have a more interesting stuff because there's not really much of a limit to what you can do because you can have like people casting spells but also shooting laser guns, and then you can have like maybe like a world where robots from the future invade these ancient fantasy people, like people in ancient fantasy get invaded by robots from the future. Or you can pretty much anything that you can think of that's a mixture of sci-fi and fantasy would be science fantasy. Some stuff that's science fantasy is like the RPG Titan Grave, the RPG Rifts, and then there's a few other. There's not a big variety, but there's some. If you can see right up there, that's Skeletor from off of He-Man. That's science fantasy. Some 80s cartoon science fantasy like Thundarr the Barbarian, He-Man, and Masters of the Universe, and Gargoyles. That's a '90s show. No, there's a few science fantasy stuff there, but one of the reasons why science fantasy ain't popular is because it's kind of it don't you know there's probably not a lot of people that cares for sci-fi and fantasy being mixed together because some people are like only sci-fi people and don't like fantasy. Some people are fantasy and don't like sci-fi, but I've always liked them both. And when I find out you can mix them both together in science fantasy, I've like come obsessed with it. And I wish I had the ability to make my science fantasy stuff that I want to make, but I don't got very much skills on anything except my imagination. And there's just a lot you can do with it. And if you want to put in the comments what you think about this video or what you think about science fantasy or any ideas of what you think what would be a good thing of science fantasy. And anything science fantasy would be just anything that's got sci-fi and fantasy in it that's mixed together. Like you can have maybe like a fantasy world that's set in like now times with guns and stuff like now, and they're getting invaded by aliens. Like a World of Worlds was a fantasy world that's getting invaded by aliens instead of just the regular Earth. It's the fantasy world that's your typical Dungeons and Dragon world, regular world with elves and dragons and demons and your regular fantasy stuff. And they're getting invaded by aliens with advanced technology, like sci-fi aliens and stuff like that. So, just if you want to put whatever you want to, if you want to put up what you think, anything that would be sound like an interesting science fantasy day. If you want to take any of my ideas and make a game out of it, I don't really care because I can't make anything myself. And if you want me to tell ideas, name another video telling my ideas of different science fantasy stuff, I will because that's my only thing I got is all these different ideas of different science fantasy stuff. And my problem is my imagination is like out of control. It just never quits. And if all I can do is just let this stuff build up until it drives me insane. And I gotta do something to get it out of my head. I can't. And as you can see in the background, most of the stuff is fantasy stuff. But I'm more of a fantasy person than a sci-fi person. But I still like the idea of having fantasy that got laser guns and robots mixed with the swords and magic and elves and dragons and stuff. So just put a comment whatever you think. Peace.